I kind of looked around and I said, so we blew it. We blew it. You're pissed, and we're going to do the best we can to make it right.
Hey everyone, I'm Jen Santos, and this is Mayhem and Method, where event pros tell the real story of what happened and what it reveals about how events actually work. Welcome back to another episode of Mayhem and Method. I have with me today Therese Jardine, the founder and CEO of Strategic Event Procurement. Thank you so much for being here with me today, Therese.
I am so happy to be here with you. It's going to be a lot of fun.
So let me start with my first question for you today. So what is your favorite on-site or hotel room comfort hack?
For Vegas in particular, because as you know, they do not put coffee makers in the rooms most of the time. Someone gifted me a little USB chargeable instant espresso machine.
Oh, cool.
And it takes those little Nescafe pods.
Yeah.
It's not the hottest that you'll ever get, and it's not the tastiest, but as a public service, I do not go out in public before I've had my coffee because it's just better for everybody. They don't want to see that. So I bring that with me, and it gets me at least over the hump so I can get down and get some real coffee.
Same. I started bringing pre-ground cold brew, and I do cold brew in my room overnight. So I survived CES this last year that way. I have it, I pre-grind it, and I bought little disposable tea bags, and then I measure it out and I bring it home and I throw it in my suitcase. You have to double bag it or you're going to have awful coffee smell. Well, it depends on your opinion on coffee smell, but everything will smell like coffee. And then I just take water in my cup overnight. Venetian now actually has refrigerators people can use, believe it or not. I know. And so I put it in the fridge, and then in the morning I have perfectly dandy cold brew, buy some half and half from Walgreens, and I'm good to go. So let's talk about on-site, shall we? So I'd love to have you kind of summarize this situation, the end point, just a couple of minutes here, and then we'll sort of unpack it from there.
Well, people who know me know that I've done, I don't know how many hundreds of hotel contracts. And I'm happy to say that most of them went really well. And we had one that didn't. And it was a perfect storm of an event strategy that was still being built out, and some, I'll say, legacy contract language and misunderstanding of the actual contract language on the part of the stakeholder. Oh. So when you pull all those things together, we were looking at, I want to say, close to $500,000 in attrition damages for one single event. And yes, that was $500,000.
Oh, wow. So since
how'd that happen?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm not a procurement person, right?
Yeah,
and this is what you do. I'm an event tech gal. I keep my butt in the seat. I keep everything running. So talk to me about what you mean by legacy contract language. I would love to understand what that means first. I get to learn all sorts of stuff on this podcast.
Okay, so at one point in time, there was really favorable language that was available to us as an organization. And due to industry changes and some various other situations, that favorable language wasn't as available as people were used to it being. We were, in many cases, we were able to not face any kind of attrition damages because we were known to be always on top of it, managing the room block and the housing and all those kinds of things. And then over the course of years, some people's views on how that should work changed. And in this particular case, whereas other contracts, we were not liable for any kind of attrition, this particular one, we were. And getting that message through to stakeholders and what it really meant for them was very challenging.
Got it. So they were kind of working on this assumption. They've been doing this let me know if I'm hearing this right. They've been doing this for a long time, or at least a while. They had this assumption that the thing we've been able to do for the last 7 years will be able to keep going on into perpetuity. And as we all know, the hotel industry, as relates to conferences, even pre-COVID, had started changing quite a bit. And
Yep.
so even though you read the contract, they were like, well, no, I know what this means. You don't need to tell me, Therese. I get it. And
Yeah, I mean,
sort of,
similar. Yeah, kind of,
yeah,
sort of. And you can only pull so many rabbits out of your hat. And,
right.
and in the past, we had situations where maybe hotel pickup wasn't going the way quite as much as we thought. And then at the end, either they would do demand gen or something like that, and there would be, the last minute grab on all the rooms that we were kind of stressing about. And that, in this particular case, it just didn't materialize.
Didn't happen.
It
Yeah.
just didn't happen.
Yep.
So, so it was just, like I said, it was kind of a perfect storm of a lot of different things. And, and the core of it was the event was designed to be much bigger than it was,
Right.
what it finally ended up being.
Got it. So like how many, like roughly, I know, say what you can based on the fact that we're not going to share the client's name, but like, are we talking like 50 rooms, 500 rooms, 1,000 rooms? Like, just kind of like, what was the magnitude of this lack of pickup that we're talking about here, if you can share?
We had done nearly a whole buyout on the hotel. So
Oh.
I think we had contracted close to 70% of their rooms, on peak.
Mm-hmm.
And I think your audience knows what on peak means. So, it's the night or 2
Yeah.
nights that everybody's supposed to be there. And then, sometimes beforehand or after, there's less rooms that people take. So it was on peak at least, I want to say, it's been many years now, but I want to say it was about 200 and some rooms on peak, which meant over the course of the block, it was several thousand room nights.
Right. Right. And
Times $350 or $250 or whatever it was at the time. It was a highly rated property. So, probably 3.5, 4-star, kind of a
right.
property. So even back then, the rates were probably in the 200 plus range. So
Yeah.
it was a lot.
Yeah. And then, so you're talking about, was there like a 50% pickup over what you expected? Like, what did it end up being?
I think I've blocked some of that out of my
That's fair.
mind.
That's totally fair. Okay. So,
But
so
it was a big giant hole. And the part of the problem was, it was kind of, this event was at the beginning of another event. And so the place where the big hole was right like the Wednesday night. So there was no way that they could put another group in place, because I know your listeners can't listen to me or can't see my hands moving, but it was kind of like the wave swelled up and then it dropped down on Wednesday and then it swelled back up on Thursday and then moved on out from there. So, there was doing a resell or, getting another group to take those rooms it was impossible.
it's not going to happen.
It
Okay.
was not
So
going to happen.
you, as the procurement magician, like, what did you end up doing then? There's got to be a good ending to the story here.
There was a good ending to the story, and the precursor to it was there was a lot of communication, because there are room block review dates, and then there are cutoff dates and release dates, and and all those things. And the hotel was very nervous, and they had carefully documented each of those conversations. And and our housing manager and my sourcing manager were also documenting all of those conversations. And so I walk into this room at the hotel during the middle of this whole thing. And I looked around and everybody was in there with their binders and their printed out emails and their log of all the communications, and they were loaded for bear. Everybody was just ready to put out, what they had done and how they had been wronged. And, and then, of course, on my side of the table, they were all, had their list of all the things that they were trying to do to mitigate and all that kind of thing. And so, I kind of looked around and I said, so we blew it.
That had to be
blew it.
hard to say.
You're pissed, and we're going to do the best we can to make it right. And my manager was in the room too, and she was kind of there just to be my support if she needed it. And she just kind of, she said she just watched everybody's shoulders just sort of drop a little bit,
Yeah.
and because they were expecting this, we've got the leverage, we've got the might, this is what we're going to do, and here's how these things are going to go down. And I was like, no, we blew it, we really did. And so the GM kind of, he stood there for a second, or sat there, and was just a little puzzled, because I know he really was not expecting that. And he finally looked at me, he goes, fill my blank rooms. And I said, okay, I'm going to do my best, starting with when this meeting is over. And, I commit to you, I'm going to do the best I can to put as many heads in your beds as I can.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, okay. And at that point in time, I kind of became my own little mini housing department. And, there were some things that I could do. And, part of it was, we had crew and staff scattered all over the city. And, and so, and myself, I was staying at a different hotel. So I was the first person I moved, out of that hotel into the one that we were short on. And, and it was like all the other hotels were performing really well on their blocks. And so I just had to go in and scrape out as many of the crew and staff that, they were the ones that we could tell what to do, pretty much.
Yeah.
And then we also, I think we put out kind of a late breaking bonus for, on the housing site for the other event that was starting right behind ours, saying, guess what? We have a sudden availability of these really much better hotel rooms. You can change out your reservations if you want to. All you have to do is this. And, so the combination of that, and I literally had my eyeballs glued to a spreadsheet for probably 15 hours straight. I don't think I slept much that night. And we did. We plugged the hole by at least 50, maybe 60, 70%. And the other thing we did was we pulled some food and beverage events into that property, ones that were maybe going to be at a restaurant someplace else, or some of those other things. We directed as much of that kind of revenue as we could into that property. And the GM was very appreciative. I mean, we still owed some money, and if for anybody who's not super versed in how hotels work, somebody paying attrition damages, it's usually you're covering their lost profit for the room. But, and the GM, they are responsible for the bottom line of the hotel, but the sales managers and all those other ones, they get measured on revenue. And so even though you're paying attrition damages, it still leaves a giant mark against them. So, doing what we could to put as much revenue back into the property really made a big
difference.
A big difference.
Yeah.
So, well, everybody learned a lot. The key stakeholder, the main person in charge of the event strategy, he learned a lot, because I had been telling him for a while that this was really going to happen, and he didn't. He was new to the role, and it was a new event, and so he was more worried about what the attendee experience was going to be like than what the financial ramifications were going to be. Because it was also in a destination that was also a family, could also be a family type property. And his concern was kids going through the lobby in flip flops with pool noodles, while executives were transitioning in between, breakout sessions, and and that was his main concern. Whereas the people 2 clicks above him were very much interested in how the budget was coming into
Right.
play on this whole
Yeah.
thing. So
Yeah. Interesting.
probably what I learned about it was, and I had been escalating, but I don't think I was escalating as clearly maybe as I should have. And I also think that my reputation for pulling a rabbit out of my hat, people didn't take it as seriously because I had always fixed it before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So. Yep.
Yeah, and I still see that GM every so often on Facebook, or not Facebook, excuse me, LinkedIn, and I always just kind of go, yep, I remember.
Yep.
I remember. It makes me remember it every time, and they say that you learn from your mistakes, and that was a master's course.
Yeah. No, absolutely. It sounds like it. I mean.
Yeah.
So you had, right? So you had this giant attrition bill that you would have had to pay at the one property, right? And then, but attrition, as I heard you explain it, it only covers, like you said, just the revenue or the profit, right? And obviously butts in seats or butts in beds in this case is actually far better, because then the hotel can recuperate a lot more. So that's interesting for me, because I didn't realize that attrition isn't actually just paying for the room nights totally, right? It's kind of like a deeply discounted sort of thing, but I can understand where it sounds like that you would potentially ruin the relationship going forward if you just pay the attrition and walk away. Is that right?
Well, I mean, attrition damages are meant to make the other party whole in terms of what the contract is. And I follow lawyers who do hotel contracting and just event contracting, and they will tell you, well, you're not contracting for all the ancillary revenue. So, I mean, you go to a hotel, you check in, you go downstairs, you have a drink or two at the bar, or you pick up a parfait of yogurt on your way to the thing, or oops, you forgot your lipstick or your earrings or something, and you go to the hotel gift shop and get that. Plus you're eating breakfast and all those other things. And so, for every night in hotel sleeping room revenue, they are also kind of counting on that extra spend. Now, you're not obligated for it because you haven't contracted for it, but that is the reality of what happens at a hotel without the heads and beds.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It also, and then there's also a lot of industry benchmarks. It's called the STR, the STAR report, and all of these big properties are measured against their competitors, and their ledgers and their room nights and all of that actual data lands into all of those benchmarking reports. And so it's also, something that pops out kind of publicly about what's happening.
Yeah. So a couple of conventions that don't meet their pickup numbers could really inadvertently end up tanking a hotel, from what I'm hearing you say.
Yeah, their owners are going to be mad because, the chains don't own most of the hotels,
Right.
So if anytime you go to a Marriott or a Hilton or a Hyatt or any of the big brands, you start paying attention to this stuff when you know it. But if you look behind at the checkout desk, it'll say this property owned by such and such, it's usually some kind of an investment company, managed by something else. So you think you're staying at, pick a brand, but that brand does not own that. And so when all of this stuff goes down, the owners and the management company also kind of have something to say.
That makes sense.
In what happened. And then, of course, to your point, the relationship, fool me once, shame on me, or shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. So it just makes the event organizer's ability to negotiate in the future, it makes it harder because, memories are long in this industry.
Yeah. And there's only so many places realistically that you could put let's say a 15,000 person event, whatever it might be, right? There's a limited number of venues and there's a limited number of hotels in each of those places that you can put events,
Yeah.
particularly as you get larger. And
Well, and
so,
this one was what we would call an in-house event.
okay.
So it meaning pretty much all of the, even though it was adjacent to a convention center and it was kind of a pre-event to a major convention that was taking place, it was still contained within that one particular hotel property for the
Okay.
most part. And those are even harder to come by.
Yeah.
Those are the big box hotels that have, fully contained convention space within them. And so, if that's the kind of experience you need for your event, there are limited numbers of those
Totally.
out
Yeah.
there.
So what happened when you started pulling people out of the other properties, right? Because you had good pickup on those other properties, right? So
Mm-hmm.
you had to be thinking, okay, so I'm making up numbers here, no idea. We're at 90% on this property. I
Mm-hmm.
can't go down below 82 before they're going to get mad at me too. Like, talk
Mm-hmm.
me a little bit through that thought process as you were doing this and not sleeping for like 2 days.
Yeah, that was actually a very real concern too, because we had, I don't remember how many hotels we had in the whole block package, but as you've been on crew. Crew tends to be the ones that are as close to the convention center as possible because we're doing the crazy hours, and you don't want to be commuting 30 minutes or longer to your hotel room, morning and night. So there were some conversations with some of those hotels that, it was like, hey, you're pulling 30 rooms out of my property. What's going on here? And, I just kind of had to tell them, look at, we've got this situation, and, we're really, and it was just kind of like, we're really performing here, and I gotta do something, and we'll make it up, we'll make it up later. And that's where having the relationship that you develop in this industry is super important, because they all kind of understood what was happening, and and what we needed to do, and the answer to them too was, and that if this was in your hotel, I would be doing that for you as well. And and that was where me having the credibility with all of those folks really mattered. And the sourcing team that we had, the agency that was also supporting during the contracting, they actually had some ability to market it within some of their other clients, where we were able to kind of get some different, fill in some of the spots. And it was a different attrition scenario. I've had a few attrition scenarios, but in one that was up in New York City, we were able to use the corporate travel database, and find people who were staying in the city and get them to move to that other hotel. And in those cases, almost always they were like, that's wonderful, because the hotel that we needed to put them in was more expensive and nicer than the one they would have been staying at. And was like, we covered the difference, because it was going to be, say it was $300 a night and we had to cover $40 to keep their budget whole. It still was a lot cheaper than paying $300 a night in damages.
Yeah.
So I got really good at figuring out ways to chuckle things around.
I bet. And you still do, right?
When I first was heading into that meeting, I was planning on kind of saying, hey, you know what, here's all the things that we did that we were supposed to do. And, and then as I looked around the room, I was like, I'm going to lose. If I try that, I'm going to lose. And, and lose meaning, it wouldn't have been a productive outcome for either side. And, and the relationship would have really taken an even bigger ding than it did. Yep. And so by just taking a breath and kind of admitting that we'd screwed up really went a long ways. And,
Yeah.
you
I,
know,
I think
I got a kudo for my boss for that.
that's great. I see that so often, and that's something that this is not specific to the events industry. It's not specific to our clients, right? But I think like this ability to say, I'm sorry, I screwed up is something that I'm just going to say our industry right now because it's an events podcast, right? But it's something that we could get a lot better at, right? And this is something I've been talking about for 15 years when I've been leading my event tech teams. We succeed or we fail as a team, right? And it usually comes with the attendees don't care whose fault it is, but that's true. Our stakeholders don't care whose fault it is. They want the result, be it the hotel, be it the people up on high that were paying the bills, right? They want the good result. And 9 times out of 10, or probably 99 times out of 100, that comes down to showing up with this culture of collaboration and looking for the win-win scenario. Win-lose might be a short-term tactic, but as you said earlier, people in this industry have really long memories.
Yeah.
And if you were to come back like the following year and try to renegotiate that tactic, they would be like, and your attrition is going to quadruple this year because, right, you did not do what you did us a dirty last year. That's just what's going to happen.
Yeah, exactly. And, you were asking me, about what I see, now, and a lot of hotels will put your room block performance, your concessions will be tied directly to that. But if you're paying damages for rooms not being used, if you're making them whole in that regard, then you shouldn't be losing your concessions. And I had a woman who I've done a little bit of work with reach out to me, and she's like, Therese, what are we going to do? We're and they were just barely under whatever their pickup target was, and they were facing losing their concessions.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, well, what do you have? What's your language? And they were, I think their attrition terms were based on lost profit, not on lost room revenue. And I was like, I said, well, but you've got $150,000 worth of concessions you're going to lose. If it comes down to it, maybe offer to pay room revenue, because that would have been, I don't know, $20,000 versus losing $150,000 worth of concessions.
Yeah. And when you say concessions, what do you mean?
Oh, okay. So concessions in hotel contracting, concessions will be things like maybe you'll get so many comp rooms. So if you consume 40 rooms, you get 1 comp room. And so a lot of times companies use that for their staff. Yeah. Or if you use so many sleeping rooms, then you get a discount on your food and beverage, or you get your meeting room rental waived, or maybe the internet package is at a discount, or there's lots of things that they'll do to kind of create the whole package, if you will. But a lot of times they'll state that all of these little goodies that you get are contingent on you fulfilling your room block.
Okay.
And of course there's some sense behind that, but when you're only a few rooms short or something like that, then you're just like, that just feels super heavy-handed. And
yeah.
So those are the things that I talk to my clients about, is when they land in those kinds of situations to, kind of stop, don't panic, step back, look at where you are, how far short you are, and what you might be losing if you do fall short. And as crazy as it may sound from somebody in procurement to just pay the man, you'll end up with less financial impact by doing that than you might otherwise. So sometimes, I guess what I'm saying is sometimes, sticking to the contract exactly as it is, there's almost always an opportunity to talk to the other side and say, hey, what can we do?
Yep. Exactly. And thank you for explaining concessions. That's what I was assuming it was, right?
Mhm.
Because I hear people
Mhm.
talk about this, right? We need to get a discount on this, so we're moving you
Mhm.
here, right? That's happened many times in my life,
Mhm.
but I
Mhm.
never actually heard it defined. And you know what happens when you assume.
Mhm.
So, and yeah,
Mhm.
I love
Mhm.
the kind of what you talked about, the way of buying your way out of it. That's something my brother and I say. It's like, well, that's just what our family. We just gonna buy our way out of the problem, right? And that's what you do if you have to. Okay, yep. We'll pay 20 rooms to keep this $150,000. That's a no-brainer to me. Like,
Yeah.
you shouldn't even have to think twice about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's um, I think people think of procurement and they automatically assume that number one thing is following the contract and saving money. But
Mm,
and sure, that's what we want to do, but you also have to be practical and pragmatic and mindful of how unintended consequences can come into play,
yep. Totally. Yeah.
you
So
know.
going back to the client situation that we were talking about.
Mhm.
So you said that, your main client, he was very much focused on the attendee experience. And this was the procurement side was really, really eye-opening for him or her, for them. Right. So
Mhm.
what happened kind of like the 2 clicks above that you had mentioned post event? Like did you ever get any feedback like about what their take on it was? How did they feel about things?
Well, I did get like a little call out in the staff meeting.
Yay.
And yeah, it was recognized. It was recognized that you know, 2 clicks above had to come to terms with the fact that the the emerging strategy for that event played a huge role in the hole that we got ourselves into.
Hmm.
Because when we were sent out to contract, the strategy for the event was of a size that was much larger than what it ultimately worked down to being. And, and that's part of the danger of, it's the push pull of needing to contract far enough in advance to get the space you need and want when you don't know exactly for sure what you need or want. And they also agreed that they hadn't given enough guidance, if you will, or guardrails around as those contract dates were coming up, and I was giving that information. They weren't ready to um, commit to the changed strategy.
Hmm.
So they
Interesting.
did kind of own that, that the rest of the world didn't all revolve around what our particular marketing cadence was, and so they kind of realized that was the cost of delaying a decision.
Right. Interesting.
So I didn't get in trouble for it,
Good.
which
Good.
I was
Yeah. And
I was like, oh, great, here we go.
exactly. End of that contract.
Yeah.
Yeah. Be interested. And I don't think you have an inch. I think if I remember right, you left this client probably not long after that. But I'd love to know like if there were any like long-term ramifications at that organization for something like this. Like was there any internal learning that took place? Did they revise kind of like their contract revision review processes? To account for something like this? Or was it just like, you know what? New strategy, new event, we have to be willing to lose this because we just don't know. I mean, that's also a perfectly legitimate choice when you don't
it
know.
it was kind of a combination of those things, and actually one of the things that I learned out of that was part of the reason there was so much confusion was we had an amended contract. So we started out with the contract, and then the event changed, and so we amended the contract, and then the event changed again, and so we amended the amendment. And then when it came time to actually dig through and figure out what all of that was, it was really kind of a spaghetti bowl. And that was part of the thing that we were talking about with the hotel was, we would have, in retrospect, we should have canceled the original contract and then rewritten it, you know, right over the top of what we canceled so that it was very clear what all the things meant. Because we were all kind of like when we were like really trying to get down to, all right, who owes how much money, it took a lot of, well, let's see, it was here, but then we have to count back to over there, and then we have to look over there, and the original was this, but then it got changed to that, and so that was one of the things that I came out of that on was, if you make that many changes, you're really better off canceling and rewriting it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I feel like we came to a natural close to this conversation, and it was really fascinating for me, right? Because I've never been able to kind of like peek under the covers to see how Procurement actually works. So I really want to thank you for your time today. I would love to have you share with my audience how they can get in touch with you, where to reach out if they have any questions. So please take it away from here.
Well, I'm on LinkedIn, and that's a good place to message me, connect with me. I try to post up there fairly often. And then you can also find me on my website, which is www.strategiceventprocurement.com, or you can email me at Therese@strategiceventprocurement.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you for bringing your strategic event procurement advice for me today to share with everybody. I really appreciate the time, and it's been a great conversation. Thank you so much.
Thanks, you too.
Thanks for listening in to another roller coaster someone else rode so you don't have to. If you enjoyed this conversation, please take a moment to rate, review, subscribe, and share so other event pros can find the show. Until next time, tame the mayhem.
Audiotocracy